It's sweet, chewy, and everyone's favorite treat when Halloween and Christmas are just around the corner. What are we talking about? Gummy candy, of course. Even more interesting is that nearly half of all gelatin made worldwide currently goes into making gummies. But have you ever stopped to ask the question, what are these savory little treats actually made of? And how are they made? Let's find out in today's video. Preparing the raw materials for gummies. Can you guess the most popular flavors of gummy bears? From raspberry to orange, and from strawberry to lemon, gummies are multi-flavored, to everyone's delight. But their recipe has stayed pretty consistent over the years. Today, they're made in factories by the tens of thousands, with some typical ingredients. By blending all these different materials together, experienced food technologists and chemists can control the various characteristics of gummy candy, such as texture, taste, and appearance. Now, the primary base ingredient responsible for that unique gummy characteristic is none other than gelatin. Edible gelatin imparts gummy bears with their chewy texture and long shelf life. The texture and the amount of time it takes the candy to dissolve in the mouth are determined by the amount of gelatin used in a recipe. Since gelatin is thermoreversible, this gives gummy candies a melt-in-the-mouth characteristic. Now, the thing about gelatin is that it is completely tasteless and odorless. And of course, we want the gummy candy to be as sweet and appetizing as possible. So sweeteners and flavorings are added to give gummy candy its taste. For the sweeteners, the manufacturer can choose between several options, such as sucrose, which is derived from beets or sugarcane, and provides a high degree of sweetness to the gummy candy. Another sugar is fructose, which is significantly sweeter than common sucrose. Corn syrup is also used because it helps prevent the other sugars from crystallizing and ruining the gummy texture. And we certainly don't want that. So corn syrup is added to help add body to the candy, maintain moisture, and most importantly, keep the budget as low as possible. However, the sweetness of the candy is only one of its qualities. The unique taste is enhanced by special artificial and natural flavors. For example, fruits, berries, honey, molasses, and maple sugar are great natural flavorings. And since the gummy has to be as flavorful as possible, artificial flavors are also added. These are a mixture of aromatic chemicals and include materials such as methylanthranilate and ethyl caproate. The tangy, citrusy flavor is imparted by acids such as citric acid, lactic acid, and malic acid. So that's all about the taste of the gummies. What about the attractive colors that we see all the time? Well, since gelatin gels have a natural faint yellow color, adding a variety of dyes is required. The gummy manufacturers can make the candy in almost any color, from red to yellow to blue. A rainbow in the form of candy, if you will. The texture is equally important and depends on many factors, such as temperature, method of manufacture, and pH. Manufacturing method and temperature are easily controlled, but the pH must be carefully calibrated. So it's controlled chemically by adding acids such as citric acid, lactic acid, fumaric acid, and malic acid. But that's not all. Other ingredients are also necessary for the manufacturing process of gummies, such as lubricating and shine-enhancing agents. For this purpose, manufacturers can choose among beeswax, mineral oil, coconut oil, pear concentrate, carnauba wax, partially hydrogenated soybean oil, and confectioner's glaze. These are often added during the filling phase of manufacturing. Now that the raw materials for the gummies are prepared, let's move on to one of the most important stage in process: compounding. The process of gummy making starts with compounding. The compounders follow the instructions outlined in the recipes and begin to physically pour the right amount of gummy raw materials we have already discussed into the main mixing tanks. These large special tanks have mixing, heating, and cooling capabilities. The gummy candy compounding can last from 1 to 3 hours, depending on the batch size. Once the batch is complete, it's transported to quality control laboratories, whose purpose is to ensure that it meets the required specifications. After the gummy candy has been compounded and passed by the quality control testing, it's time to actually start the formation of the candy we see in stores on shelves. Pumped into mogul machine. A starch molding machine known as a mogul takes over when the gummy batch is pumped into it. The mogul is fantastic at its job because it can efficiently perform the multiple tasks involved in making gummy candy. Since starch is the main component, the machine is aptly named a starch molding machine. So, what does it actually do? The mogul has three primary purposes. First, it prevents the soft candy from sticking to the molds, allowing for easy removal and handling. Secondly, the machine secures the gummy candy in place during the drying, cooling, and setting processes. And lastly, and most importantly, it gives it a proper texture by absorbing moisture from the candies. Anyway, gummy making in a mogul is a continuous process. It begins with stacking trays of previously filled, cooled, and formed gummy candy at the start of the machine. Then, these trays are removed one by one from the stack one by one, after which they enter the next section of the machine, known as the starch buck, through a conveyor belt. Removing excess starch. Once the gummy candy enters the starch buck, the trays are inverted. Due to this, the gummy candy will fall out into a vibrating metal screen known as a sieve. The vibrating action of the sieve, in concert with oscillating brushes, helps to remove the excess starch that is still covering the gummy candy. Another recent device, the pneumatic starch buck, further automates this step. The device works by placing a tightly fitting cover over the filled trays. After it's inverted, the candies will adhere to the cover and remain in their ordered position. Next, fast rotating compressed air jets will quickly remove all excess starch so the candy can be conveyed for further processing. Reusing the starch. Of course, the manufacturers endeavor to save as much as possible to cut costs, so the starch removed from the gummy candy is reused, but it needs to be cleaned, dried, and reconditioned first. And how is that done? Well, the first part entails removing the candy particles by passing the starch through a metal screen known as a sieve. Once it passes the sieve, the starch is conveyed to a recirculating starch conditioning system. This machine is responsible for drying it by passing it through hot, moving air. After the starch has dried completely, it's cooled down by cool air jets and then transferred back to the mogul so it can be reused in the starch molding process. So, now that the starch is back into play, let's move on to the next stop of indenting. Indenting the starch. After the starch has returned from the dryer, it's poured into the empty trays and then leveled. Remember these trays? They're the same as those inverted and emptied in step 3. Now, the next step is to move these starch-filled trays to a printer table where a board with the mold's inverse is printed. This board will then print a specific pattern into the starch, so it has an indent. After the indentation, the trays are transferred to the depositors. Depositing the gummy candy. Now the gummy candy, compounded in step 1, is moved to the depositors. To put it simply, a depositor is the part of the mogul with a filling nozzle that can deliver the exact amount of candy into the trays as required when they pass under it. The depositor section of the mogul can contain 30 or more depositors. It actually depends on how many imprints there are on the trays. Interestingly, modern depositors can add color, flavor, and acids to the gummy base right there in the depositor. It helps to speed up the process because it allows the various colors and flavors to be made simultaneously. Cooling. Now the gummy candy has to be cooled down, so the sweet-filled trays are sent to a cooling room. This is where they will remain for a better part of 24 hours until the gummy is appropriately cooled and formed. Once the gummy candy has cooled and set into the molds, all that is left to do is give the finishing touches until it's ready. Packaging. After 24 hours in the molds, the gummy candies are transferred to a large drum tumbler. They're tumbled in a food-grade oil that efficiently absorbs any remaining cornstarch and keeps the gummy candies soft and fresh. Finally, the gummy candies are packed in their specified packaging, ready to be sold. And that's all for today. Click on one of the 2 videos on your screen right now, and we'll catch you guys in the next one.